You know, it's an honor really to be a part of anything that's associated with Kendaji's name. And I feel very honored, you know, to be the lead-off speaker in the series that bears his name. I want to thank my fellows in Neighborhood Without Borders. Thanks for the confidence you placed in me. And I hope that we can get the series off to a rousing start. You know, I'm somewhat out of my comfort zone. I write plays. And a few years ago, I had the pleasure of writing a play called The Saints of St. John Street. And basically, it was a play based on a lot of my fondest memories, you know, associated with the time I spent in the St. John Street area growing up. I basically lived in the area from the 2nd grade until the 7th grade, and then we moved to other parts of town. I've always had very fond memories of the St. John Street area. However, you know, writing a play is a lot different from trying to do something historical. You know, and you know, you can't really just take St. John Street as you do it in a play. You can't take its history out of context. You know, history is a series of connections, relationships, you know, that all sort of converge, you know, to make up the story. But also have to get back into the books and to put St. John Street in a historical framework. So, as we know, in history, there's always a beginning. And the history of St. John Street actually, you know, it's the history of Michigan, it's the history of the native people, it's the history of the French settlers. You know, at one time, Michigan was one of the territories of the French government up until, you know, the French and Indian War. And then it became the possession of the British Empire. And it remained a British territory, of course, until the Revolutionary War of 1776. And then it became the property of the United States. And it was not a state in the United States until 1836. But, you know, all during the time that the French owned the territory, it was inhabited primarily by the Algonquin nation, the Iowa nation, and other Indian nations. But the predominant nation was the Algonquins, and some of their bands included the Sox, the Fox, the Miami, and the Chippewa. Now, the Treaty of 1819 between the United States, and I'm going to, you know, be going back and forth to this PowerPoint, and you know, let me apologize, you know, for the quality of the photos. There's just not a lot of photos related to St. John Street, and I'm going to do the best I can, and we'll see what we can do here. The Treaty of 1819 between the United States and the Chippewa Nation gave 11 plats of land, as you can see here, consisting of 640 acres each to individual members of the Chippewa Nation. And this was in addition, you know, to the major reservation that they had negotiated, which is located up near the Mount Pleasant area. One of the plats, one of the 11, was called Indian reservation at the Grand Traverse of the Flint River. Now, of course, we know Grand Traverse is French for Great Crossing, okay? Now, many of us who had local history in our elementary schools, I did, remember Jacob Smith. And Jacob Smith was a colonial fur trader who set up shop along the Great Crossing, the Grand Traverse. And, you know, it's roughly located at the river on Grand Traverse near Kersey Street, okay, just for historical reference. Now, all during this time, you know, this land was just wooded area, lots of lakes, you know, lots of swamps, and was basically inhabited only by the Native Americans, French fur traders, and some colonial fur traders. Okay? Now follow me, I'll get to St. John Street in a minute. And also, you know, the area became a haven for runaway slaves because no one could find them, you know, in the dense forest. You know, so, you know, a lot of them would, you know, utilize the Underground Railroad to get this far north, and then they disappeared to the forest. The French fur traders also had a lot to do with the safety of the area for runaways. Because they had put out word that the area was just filled with disease and pestilence, you know, to prevent settlers from coming into the area and driving away the game that they depended on for a living. The trading of furs was a big business, of course, back in the day. Somehow, by hook or crook, Jacob Smith became the owner of one of those 640 acres of land, namely the land where he had set up shop at the Grand Traverse. When he passed on, he deeded certain portions of that plat to his son, Albert Smith. Jacob Smith had married a Native American woman, and they had several children. Albert Smith was one of the children. Albert Smith inherited a plot of his land that was called the Fairview Plat. Can you follow me? So, you know, the first inhabitants of the St. John Street area were the members of the Algonquin Nation, certain runaway slaves, fur traders of the French ilk, and colonial fur traders. Now, you know, once Lewis and Clark made their expedition to the Pacific Ocean and knew that there was land all the way through from, you know, up until that point, they'd only discovered America up to the Mississippi River. Once Lewis and Clark went all the way to the Pacific, you know, that's when the doctrine of manifest destiny set in. That's where Europeans felt it was their destiny to inhabit all of the land that was called eventually the United States. Okay? They felt it was their God-given right to inhabit that land. So, slowly and slowly, settlers, you know, began to locate up until 1835, what was called the Michigan Territories. Now, the name St. John Street first appears in directories as early as 1874. It is listed in that directory as the third street from Saginaw Street, from the North City limits to 3rd Avenue. Okay? Now, most of us remember Third Avenue was where the old IMA, I think U of M Flint, is now on that property. And us old timers will remember too that St. John Street, in deference, to this description in the directory, we can remember that beyond Hamilton, there was an industrial park. And the industrial park contained the DuPont factory, Pfeiffer Brewery, and Salai's Sausage Company, okay, among others. And then St. John took up again on Wood Street, right behind Central Wholesale. And I remember that vividly because we played along the railroad tracks in that area. As I said earlier, the first plat recorded for St. John Street was the Fairview plat. And of course, Fairview School was named after that plat. The second recorded plat was called the Camp Hall plat. And Camp Hall Street was named in honor of Joseph Camp Hall, who owned that plat of land. Later, there was a second addition to the Fairview plat, which made St. John Street stretch from the Flint River to the Pierre Marquette Railroad tracks, right between Buick and Michigan Avenue, were the Pierre Marquette Railroad tracks. And it stretched from Garfield Street, from Hamilton Street all the way to Florida. Okay? Is that you back there, Woodrow?